Yeah. I know I was gonna ask you. Okay, yeah. So BJ, you've been having a lot of people just seem so um disappointed in WMMA ever since that Carla and Rose fight. Like, how's it feel to you, like, man? Like, how's it been for you? Has this was this card disappointing, and has fights been that disappointing to you as of lately?
No, no. The answer to that question for me is no, because I just feel like women's MMA, what in the UFC, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's come, but we've had this conversation before, man. Like, there's been cards where there's like one fight, or cards where there's no women's fights. You know what I'm saying? And when you have less of a sampling pool, when you have less of a when you have a lesser sample to pull from, it's kind of under scrutiny a little bit more. Like, I was talking about this to somebody else the other day. Um, if you had as many fights, if you had as many female fights as you had men's fights in the UFC, then I feel like the women are subject to more scrutiny because there's not a whole lot of women's fights, coupled with the age range and the demographic of the UFC. You know what I'm saying? Like, that stuff all meshed together makes it makes it easier to criticize women when they have a boring fight, versus we see at least 2 to 3 boring ass fights per card from the men. You know what I'm saying? And it doesn't resonate as quite as much as it does with women. You know what I'm saying? Like, we've seen some boring title fights from the men. You know what I'm saying? We've seen those. Like, we've seen exciting fights. We've seen boring title fights. You know what I'm saying? Yoel Romero versus Israel Adesanya was one of the most boring fights ever. You know what I'm saying? So it's resonating more with the women because the sample size are smaller. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just it's not as many fights. So when you do have a boring fight, it's like, oh my God, all these fights. It's until we see another barn burner that it'll change. Possibly Joanna and Whaley, then everybody's gonna be hyped back up again on women's MMA. You know what I'm saying? But with that Carla fight, and then this week being low level fights and all that kind of stuff, and Holly Holm not looking the best, of course it's going to be like, oh my God, these women suck. Like, these fights are boring. You know what I'm saying? So if there were 5 female fights on this card versus 3, you know what I'm saying, then I don't think it would have resonated quite as much.
Right. Yeah, I think when you have the range is usually 1 to 3 or 4 fights, it kind of makes people think it's in a bad state. But the game's going to transition. I mean, the older fighters get, there's going to be a down period. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean it's over. That's why I'm like, to me, it's still going. I mean, there's Invicta. Like, y'all start watching Invicta. Y'all start watching ONE FC or LFA. Like, see, I'm watching all these other girls fight, and every single fight on Invicta 47 was better than that Carla Rose fight. So I'm like,
Right.
no, there's nothing bad going on here, because there's still like a whole lot of women out there that want to do the sport justice, not just these two fighters that only casual fans base the whole game off of. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, everybody is like, oh, Rose is a god. She let us down. Now what do we do? No, get out of here. You know what I mean? Like, if you put your faith in one person to hold this whole thing down, you ain't really a fan. So my thing is, get out of here with that noise. Like, there's other women out here fighting. You just need to start opening your eyes to these other fights. Hell, there's still organizations I'm trying to watch. But overall, I think the women are putting on good performances. Like,
And
every
then
now and then
the
you're gonna have
Rose and Carla thing, man. Like, the Rose and Carla thing, man. The stakes were so high in that fight, bro.
so
Like,
high. Yeah. And the
the
thing is,
stakes.
look, I'll say this. Everybody again thought Rose was gonna blast her out. That's why they mad. See, I picked Carla, and I was like, it's gonna be what it is. Don't expect a barn burner. So when it happened, I was like, okay, told you so. That's all it was to me. But
Yeah.
everybody that got a boring fight, they was like, oh, it's done. This game sucks. I'm like, they forgot Izzy and Yoel was not a good fight, but they still like all the other
Hmm.
men fights.
Hmm.
Mhm. In that
Yeah,
same
man,
night,
like,
Joanna and Wei Lee was everybody's savior in that game. So I don't know.
I'm telling you, man, it's literally just the most of it is literally the demographic, man. Like,
Yeah.
they are, if you look on, like, I'm active on Twitter, you know what I'm saying? If you look, like, sometimes I live tweet, you know what I'm saying, when things are going on, you know what I'm saying? And the comments that you see when there's a women's fight coming up next, oh, it's time to go flip the hamburgers, or it's time to go take a bathroom break, or it's time to go take shots during this next fight. Like, they're already not looking forward to the women's fights anyways. So then when you have a high stakes tactical matchup like you had in Rose and Carla, listen, we knew the weight of the fight. You knew the weight of that fight. I knew the weight of that fight. You knew how that fight could potentially play out. I knew how it could potentially play out. But see, they don't know women's MMA like that. They're not invested in the storyline behind women's MMA. 90% of those people watching found out that night that Carla and Rose had fought for the title 8 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like, they haven't been invested in following these storylines and stuff for that long. The WMMA community has been. You know what I'm saying? Not that 18 to 35-year-old white male demographic. They weren't invested in that. They don't know anything about that. They probably didn't even know who Carla. They probably never knew Carla Esparza was the champion. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, the first champion that they probably knew of was Joanna. So, I mean, it's you got to look at who is saying these things too, though. That's why I don't really pay it that much attention, because I'm like, look at who's saying it. Like, you've got Justin, who is a FedEx driver, 28 years old, who's on Twitter saying it. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how I look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I told you, most of the guys I had watched one card with, and the night Wei Lee was fighting, they didn't even know who she was. Like, girl
Right.
had a belt, and they're asking me, "Oh, who has the belt?" I'm like, "She got a belt." And like, "Who's this girl?" I'm like, "Be quiet, watch the fight."
Right. Right.
I'll be like, "Watch the fight, you'll learn something." But it's like they don't want to learn that. So yeah, it's always that demographic. So
all they see is girls fighting. They don't see lifelong martial artists fighting. They don't see that. They only see, oh, it's a chick fight. Who's the hottest girl? Who's the hottest girl in this fight? That's what they look at, you know what I'm saying? Like, versus we looking at, you know what I'm saying, skill sets and past fights and footage and tendencies and, you know what I'm saying, improvements and all that. That's what we're looking at, so hell, they don't even look at that when it comes to the men.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you can't question it,